Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Williams, a youth tutor and a board member with the South Baldwin Literacy Council. This story is based on The Polar Express, written by Chris Van Allsburg. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, Chris lay quietly in his bed. He did not rustle his sheets. He breathed slowly and silently. He was listening for a sound his friend claimed he would never hear. Ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, his friend had insisted, but Chris knew he was wrong. Late that night, he did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. He looked through the window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of his house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. The conductor stood at the open door of the cars. It's time to go, all aboard. Chris put on his slippers and robe and he tiptoed downstairs and out the door. All aboard! Chris ran up to him. Well, are you coming? Chris said, where? Why, to the North Pole, of course. This is the Polar Express. Chris took my hand and I pulled him aboard. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. They sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat covering as white as snow. They drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. They traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. They climbed mountains so high it seemed as if they would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster they ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. That is the North Pole. The North Pole. It was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, they saw no elves. They are gathering at the center of the city. That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas. The children all asked, who receives the first gift? He will choose one of you. Look, shouted the children, the elves. And outside they saw hundreds of elves as our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole. They slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no farther, I stopped and led them outside. They pressed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of them stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound like nothing they ever heard. Can you hear it? Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. Santa marched over to them and pointing to Chris said, let's have this fella here. He jumped into his sleigh and I handed Chris up to him. He sat on Santa's knee and Santa asked, now what would you like for Christmas? He knew that he could have any gift imaginable, but the thing he wanted most was not inside Santa's giant bag. What he wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When he asked, Santa smiled. Then he gave Chris a big hug and told an elf to cut a bell from the reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood holding the bell high above him and called out the first gift of Christmas. A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to Chris and he put it in his bathrobe pocket. I helped him down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled above us, then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. As soon as they were back inside the Polar Express, the other kids asked the children to see the bell. He reached into his pocket, but the only thing he felt was a hole. Chris had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. Let's hurry outside and look for it, one of the children said. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. They were already on their way home. It broke his heart to lose the bell. When the train reached his house, he sadly left the other children. He stood at his doorway and waved goodbye. I said something from the moving train that Chris couldn't hear. What? Chris yelled out. Merry Christmas! The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, his little sister Sarah and Chris opened their presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one small box behind the tree. It had Chris's name on it. He opened it, and inside was the silver bell. There was a note. Found this on the seat of my sleigh. You better fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C. He shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound his sister and he had ever heard. But his mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," his father said, "it's broken." When he'd shaken the bell, his parents had not heard a sound. At one time, most of Chris's friends could hear the bell, but as the years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear the sweet sound. Though he's grown old, the bell still rings for Chris, as it does for all who truly believe. Believe! Merry Christmas! And special thanks to the Caboose Club Model Train Museum right here in Foley, Alabama.